Hey everyone, back on the couch again, but to spice things up, I put my old Baby Yoda and my life-size Chucky doll on the couch to make it a little bit more visually interesting. Last week, I ended up taking a little weekend trip to Charleston, South Carolina. It wasn't to specifically go to movies like the previous Labor Day weekend, where I drove 90 minutes just to see Tenet in Danville, Virginia. This was to do, like museum stuff, visited Fort Sumter, some of the outdoor stuff they have there. It was a very fun trip. I had never been to Charleston before. Most of my experience in South Carolina has been like driving through it to get to Florida, or it's been Myrtle Beach, which is a really chintzy tourist trapped place. I'm not a big fan of Myrtle Beach. But since we're going to be out of state anyway, also saw two movies and wanted to talk about that experience. So, the first movie I watched was on last Saturday night, and it was Unhinged, the Russell Crowe road rage movie. The theater I saw this at was in Charleston. It was a Regal Cinebar, which is, I guess, Regal's version of an Alamo Drafthouse, because the lobby, such as it was, things were shut down for COVID, but the lobby had pool tables, and it had like giant posters of movies from like the 90s and the 80s and the 70s. So there was like The Crying Game and Chinatown, and it was very fun. I really enjoyed the lobby of this thing. Like, if it weren't COVID and this were actually a busy Saturday night at a movie theater, this seems like it would be a really cool place. Like, there's a circular bar like right in the center of the lobby. I guess that's where you order concessions as well. I didn't see any concession bar proper where you would see popcorn or anything. It was just this bar, and they had a paper menu for like little snacks and stuff. I don't know if that's different in non-COVID times, but yeah. And I mean, Alamo's not the only dinner movie theater that's out there. Obviously, that's just my favorite and the one that's local. But there's also like Cinebistro. There's one of those that's reasonably local here too, and it's kind of the same thing. And back in Rhode Island, there was a theater many years ago that I saw The Pianist at with my uncle. And they had like big like Cadillac plush leather car chairs that were like removed, and you use that. And there was like you'd sit at a table, and there's like a little light, and you'd press the light in the center of the table, and that would tell a waiter or waitress to come to you. That was a very interesting experience. I didn't really like how the seats were set up in that scenario, but nowadays it's sort of just all seats, and then you might have an individual table. Like my Alamo has like individual tables, almost like a school desk. This Regal Cinebar, though, you had the seat, and then you had like a very long like bar, almost like you're sitting at a bar. There was almost no room between the seat and this bar, though, so even my skinny ass was having trouble fitting in there. So that was a little weird. And for a Saturday night at a movie theater, fucking dead. Dead as hell inside this theater. There were only two other people that I saw in the lobby, and those two other people, this hippie-looking couple, they were also happened to see Unhinged. So, the two of us, me and my fiance, we were in like one of the first rows. I like to sit a little closer to the front, not like the super front part, but like the front of the back part. You know what I'm talking about, right? Do I have to draw you a diagram? And then the hippie couple was many rows behind me. So this theater, the way this is set up, 4 people in total in here. I didn't order anything to eat or drink, so I had my mask on the entire time. She had her mask on the entire time. I didn't see the hippie couple behind me, but they were wearing masks in the lobby, so unless they took them off to do something, they had them on as well. So, very empty theater, very spaced apart. It did look phenomenally clean, I will say that. Once again, the lobby and the theater itself looked friggin' spotless. I've never seen movie theaters this clean before in my life, ever. And so, once again, this ended up being an experience where I thought that sitting in the movie theater with my mask on for an hour and a half felt much safer than anywhere else I'd been in public since COVID began. In fact, even earlier that morning, we had stopped at IHOP, and I have never felt more dangerous anywhere than at IHOP, because, I just wanted the IHOP tenders for breakfast / lunch / brunch or whatever, and like our waitress never covered her nose with her mask. I gave her a really bad tip for that. I'm usually a very generous dipper, but, I could see the kitchen from where we were seated, and one of the kitchen staff just had their mask around their neck, and I didn't see them once pull it up around their face. Honestly, only one of the people, I think they were a busboy, ever kept their mask on the entire time and wore it properly. No one else in this IHOP did. Also, this IHOP was not socially distanced at all. Like, they put up plexiglass between all of the booths. So normally there'd be an empty space, or there'd be like a little like wood or fake wooden railing, and they just put plexiglass between it to separate them. But between like the booths and the tables, there was no separation. Like, they didn't block off any tables to not sit anyone at. So this was a clusterfuck. If I end up with COVID in the next, it's been a week since this happened. So if in the next week I get COVID, it's because of that fucking IHOP, that fucking Mount Pleasant, South Carolina IHOP. That place is a petri dish. Don't go there. So I felt very dangerous there. And then throughout Charleston, went to museums, had to keep your mask on the entire time in any of the museums. And there was a couple of outdoor parts. I kept my mask on for the most part if there were people around. There were a couple parts, because it was hot out, where I'd take my mask off if I knew there was no other parties of people 6 feet or closer to me. But still, I mean, between like the little like market they had, which for the most part you're walking on the outside of it, or the thing with the pineapple fountain, or the museums, you're never as distanced from people as I was in the movie theater. So no matter where I went on this little day trip in the middle of COVID, the movie theater actually did feel to me like the safest place. And yet the fact that this is the second time I've been to a movie theater in these post-COVID times, or these current during COVID times, and no one has been there. Tenet was a Sunday morning on a 3-day weekend. This was a Friday night. This was a 7 o'clock or 7:30 show on a Saturday night. Now, Charleston's not exactly a giant metropolis, but you'd expect more than 4 people in a movie. And I know Unhinged has been out for like 3-4 weeks or whatever, so I understand that, but there was no one else anywhere for Tenet or New Mutants or any of the other movies. Yeah, it seems to me that people are, even if they're not afraid to do anything else that's open right now, even if they're not afraid to go to a restaurant to eat and sit down, or to go to a store, or in my case, when I went here, to a museum, for some reason they're extra afraid of movie theaters. And maybe it's because movie theaters are one of the last things that have been reopened under this. Maybe because they think more people are going to show up than actually are. Maybe they're used to going to movie theaters and seeing that they're not cleaned very well. And as someone who used to be the popcorn jockey at a movie theater, sweeping up as much popcorn as at least was visual so that the next set could come in, I understand that movie theaters generally between sets in normal pre-COVID times weren't the cleanest places in the world. But right now, given what movie theaters are doing to try to lure people back because of how financially strained they are after being closed for so long, and the fact that nobody is showing up to them, they probably are safer than a lot of these other places. Again, that's just my opinion, just the opinion of a guy who's been to a couple places recently. Not a scientist, not a medical doctor. Don't take my advice and change your behavior if you're not going to a movie. But it just seems weird to me that people aren't showing up. And it's either because the product is not what they're looking for, and I mean, right now, there's only a handful of movies that are in theaters. And, if you're not interested in Tenet or Unhinged or New Mutants or Broken Hearts Globe Gallery or David Copperfield, or Writings on Bathroom Walls, there's a couple other movies that are showing, or Bill and Ted, and you don't want to, I mean, you can watch that on VOD. But if you're not interested in the product, then you have no reason to go out. But if you are interested in the product and you're still not going out, it's because you're afraid of the experience. And I understand people's fear in the generality, but it seems that people are specifically afraid of this, because I'm seeing people in other places not acting like they're afraid. Like, yeah, sure, they may wear a mask and they may wear a mask correctly, but otherwise they're still going out, and they're still like wandering in non-essential stores, or sitting down to eat a meal at a restaurant with maybe distanced tables, or maybe not if you're at that fucking Petri dish IHOP. So it seems weird that people are so afraid of movie theaters and not these other things. To me, it seems weird. But I understand going to 3 movie theaters in 2 states, and none of these are really gigantic metropolitan cities. I might be seeing something a little bit skewed, but it does seem very weird to me that this is the experience. Anyway, so the movie Unhinged, now that I've seen it, I would describe it as delightfully over the top. Since seeing the movie, we've been quoting some of the Russell Crowe lines, like, I'll show you what a bad day is, or, there's a courtesy tap here. There's a couple, really funny lines. Like, Russell Crowe is going, full Nicolas Cage in this movie, where he's just having a ball being, this over-the-top crazy guy. And the movie itself, the violence is over the top, the logic is a little skewed. It's over the top is the best phrase I can use to describe this movie. It does not take place in a realistic universe. It takes place in this weird over the top universe. I'd say the main problem with the movie is how the script deals with the protagonist. The woman who is the main character of the movie, all of the problems in her life are a result of her bad decisions. And normally, if you're writing a movie like this, where someone is being beset upon by a crazy person, you'd want to make that protagonist likable and make her more the victim of circumstance, as opposed to someone who is actively causing her life to be bad. So it seems odd that they wrote the character that way, because she chooses not to set an alarm, and so she wakes up late. Her son gives her good advice about which road to take, and yet she insists on taking the interstate. Her son tells her not to honk at Russell Crowe, and yet she honks at Russell Crowe. Son tells her to apologize, she doesn't apologize. Throughout this entire movie, she keeps making horrible decisions that make her situation worse and worse. Whereas if I were writing this movie, that's probably the one major thing I'd change. Or even she leaves her purse with her phone on top of her car when she's gassing up her car and then going into the convenience store to pay for it. She's not a very bright character in this movie, so that's the one deficit. They should have written the main character to be A, smarter, and B, to be more a victim of bad circumstances as opposed to being a victim of her bad active decisions. But I had fun with the movie. It's not a traditionally good movie by any stretch of the imagination. This is a B movie. If Russell Crowe weren't in this movie, I could see this being a direct-to-video thriller from the late 90s. But it's fun. The violence when it happens is so brutal and so over the top, as are some of the car accidents in the movie, that you're just kind of rocked aback, whoa, I did not expect the movie to go there, but that's fucking violent. Yeah, but it's so fucking goofy about it that I found it very hilarious. Also, the song choice for the closing credits is chef's kiss hilarious. So yeah. But if you're interested in seeing Unhinged while it's playing in theaters and drive-ins, I think it's fun. I think it's worth it. Obviously, Tenet is the much better movie as far as a quality movie and a movie that has themes and stuff. But Unhinged is fun. Unhinged maybe has a weird message if you wanted to dive down into it. According to the movie Unhinged, the world is a violent cesspool just waiting to snap, which, if you watch the news, maybe, Ruth Bader Ginsburg just died yesterday, so the United States, at the very least, is kind of a powder keg right now, so maybe the movie has a point to that. There's also a slightly misogynist theme running through that movie in the way it portrays the main character and her life and stuff, so that's a little iffy, but otherwise, it's a fun movie. So that was Saturday night. And then Sunday, did a couple more things in the morning in Charleston. That's when I went to Fort Sumter, which I'd never been to before. Toured that. You get on a ferry, you go to Fort Sumter. The interior museum is closed, but everything on the exterior is still open, and the gift shop's open. And the park ranger who introduced us there and gave us a little speech about Civil War and civil discourse, I thought that was really nice. So I had a really fun time there. not a huge. I'm not like I'm not a big Civil War buff or anything, but I like history in general. So that was cool. And then hit up a couple more places on Sunday, and then we started driving back to Raleigh. And about halfway between Charleston and Raleigh, so 2.5 hours, is a town called Florence. And there was a movie theater there called Regal Swamp Fox. And, there's 3 big movies out right now in theaters. And I'd seen Tenet last weekend and saw Unhinged the previous day. So the last one to go see was New Mutants. So, this Regal Swamp Fox Theater, this is in a town called Florence, South Carolina. This theater, also immaculately clean. The difference in this theater is that it had a smell of an aquarium. And by that I mean not a home aquarium, but like when you go to an aquarium, to see the penguins and the otters and stuff. It smelled like that. So whatever cleaning materials they're using in that theater, it's like very strong like aquarium disinfectant level, I think, because that's the entire theater smelled like that. Funny thing is, I went to the restroom in this Regal, and much like the restroom in the Danville theater, also the cleanest fucking public restroom I've ever seen in a movie theater. This one actually, this was pretty funny. It actually had like vases with like fake flowers on both ends of the counter. It was like they added like a little like spruce up touch, like please come back to our movie theater type stuff. That was very weird. It was very clean, but very weird. So going to the auditorium for New Mutants, and it is a rather large size auditorium. Not like one of their biggest, I don't think, but probably at least 100-seater. Now for seating, I took the place I normally take for seating, which is in like the front section. Now oddly enough, there were 4 people who chose the front row. Second row completely blocked off for seating. The way the theaters are basically doing it is basically they'll open up every other row, and then if people sit in those rows, then they distance them that way with usually 2 seats between parties. At least that's how I found it so far. So front row, you had 4 people. Second row, blocked off from anybody sitting there. And then I picked the third row. Once I got into that auditorium, I knew that was going to be a problem because the 4 people in the front row, they were probably like 17-year-old teenagers, and they were talking obnoxiously. Now, this was during the trailers, but in my experience, if people are talking that loudly and that annoyingly through the trailers, they will continue on into the feature. So aside from these 4 non-mask-wearing troglodytes in the front row, there was only like 2 other people in the theater, and they were sitting in the front row of the second section, way to the left. So the 2 of us, we just went to the back, like a bunch of rows, so that we were well distanced between either of those parties. Far enough back where if the movie was sufficiently loud enough, we could not hear the 4 annoying teenagers in the front. Even more so, I mean, people who talk at movie theaters are the lowest form of human scum in general and deserve the death penalty. But if you're going to the movies in a pandemic and your mask is off and it's not because you're eating concessions, because none of these 4 had any concessions at all, no drinks, no popcorn, nothing, and you're just talking, just fucking die. I hope Russell Crowe meets you on the way home and gives you the worst day of your life. But aside from that, otherwise, we were sitting back sufficiently from both of these parties where I was able to enjoy the movie fine. Auditorium, like the rest of the theater, smelled like an aquarium. And yeah, so as far as the movie itself, New Mutants sucks. I can't beat around the bush. It's not a good movie. I'm a little worried about the CBS All Access version of The Stand that's now coming out, because that's the same director, Josh Boone. But let's just say this. So, I think the only other movie I saw by Josh Boone was the Fault in Our Stars movie. Now, I like the Fault in Our Stars book. I know, Hank Green or Josh Green, whichever, John Green, whichever the fucking Green brothers wrote it. It's YA. It's basically a love story with cancer people. Yeah, I get all of the reasons why people don't like that book. I thought it was a perfectly fine, perfectly charming book. I liked it. I fucking hated the movie version. The movie version suffered from so many poor casting in directorial choices. Like, I remember the really bad scene in the Anne Frank house where it just cuts to these weird overacting reaction shots of like the tour guide and shit. And Ansel Elgort, I felt, was really fucking miscast in the main boy role in that movie. So yeah, I'm not a fan of that movie. And now I'm finding that Josh Boone, he is a director who seems to want to make an 80s teen movie, but is not talented enough to make a good 80s teen movie. Because that's basically what New Mutants is. New Mutants is it attempts to be The Breakfast Club meets Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors. And it's nowhere near the quality of either of those. It cannot pull that off. And to a certain extent, there are clips of Buffy the Vampire Slayer in a couple parts in the movie, so it's very clear that Josh Boone is trying to put a little bit of Joss Whedon in there as far as how teenagers talk to each other. He cannot pull it off. Josh Boone does not have the talent for that. So, mostly, as I watched this movie that had a really good teaser trailer like 2-3 years ago that got everyone excited. It's like, ooh, is this a horror movie, X-Men movie? And it had Maisie Williams from Game of Thrones. It had Anya Taylor-Robb from all the artsy indie horror movies. Had a guy from Stranger Things in there. It had a good cast, and the idea of a X-Men horror movie sounded very interesting. And then, of course, there was the news that they wanted the studio, Fox at the time, now Disney owns it, but wanted to do reshoots to bump up the horror. But then it got delayed too long, and then the actors sort of aged out of reshoots, so they wouldn't even look the same. And Disney just kind of pushed it out into theaters during COVID as a sacrificial lamb to be like, people are looking forward to this. Let's just push this out because we don't really care what this does. Let's just test out the waters of these movies. I really wish the reshoots had happened for this. So let's just say the CGI is bad. Let's just go out there. Most of the CGI in this movie is bad. I understand this is a lower budgeted X-Men movie. I think it was budgeted at $50 million, but there's a CGI bear that's not very good. There's some fire effects. CGI is bad. This movie does not have a good structure to a point where I could not tell where the first act ended and the second act began. Like, I kind of get where the third act is, because the third act is when stuff happens. But a lot of this movie is very dull conversations between characters with no rising action and no tension and no building to anything. It's basically just like we have a main character, we don't know what the main character's powers are, but we kind of do anyway. And these characters meet, and these characters don't get along very well, and you have this one single doctor in this very empty mental institution / prison, and nothing happens. Like, for the longest part of this movie, just nothing happens. You have, like, characters explaining their backstory, or, having, like, these little, like, Nightmare on Elm Street nightmare things that go on, or, they don't get along, or they have a budding lesbian relationship, or whatever, and it's so dull, and the dialogue is awful. There's so many lines of dialogue that just lay out there, like they just drop like a lead balloon because they're so bad. And I don't know. It's what you had here was a good concept. This idea of doing this teenage, like the idea of doing Breakfast Club meets Nightmare on Elm Street 3 in an X-Men movie. Okay, I am on board with that concept. The teaser trailer obviously gave some of that, so it felt good like that. It had a weird version of Brick in the Wall, it's a good concept. I'm not too familiar with the comic book, but the characters in and of themselves, if someone else were writing them, could have gone well. But this is just a really piss poor execution on this. It is just on a screenplay level. It just doesn't work. There's no oomph there. When the horror stuff starts coming, it's not good. Like the main horror creatures are like these tall, skinny, like Slender Man looking things that have like a mask on, and then they take it off and they're just teeth, basically. But these tall, skinny CGI Slender Man wannabes are basically wearing like skinny jeans and a black silk shirt that's open up, so they just look like perverts at a 70s disco, like, bro, let's come to disco kind of people. Like, they don't look scary or intimidating. They just look funny. And it's no. It's just no. And, no. It's not a good movie. I'm sorry. It's like, after so many delays in such a good concept, and the movie was finally getting released, a movie we probably thought would never get released or might get dumped directly to Hulu or Disney Prime or something. And then we get it, and it gets a theatrical push, so we get to see it in theaters, and it's this fucking bad. And I'm just like, oh man, no. So you can skip New Mutants. I mean, it's a shame. Like, this is one of the times where the director was probably dead wrong. Like, the movie that's in theaters is the director's preferred vision. It's the director's cut. Josh Boone's a bad director. I'm sorry. He's he can't do this. I was excited about The Stand, thinking like, hey, a longer adaptation, a more R-rated adaptation to fully embrace the book in the way that cheesy ABC adaptation couldn't. I mean, the ABC adaptation, it has its moments, it has a cool cast, but it's early 90s ABC network television standards and practices. It cannot embrace that book. And then the teaser footage we've seen has been okay-ish, but I'm worried now because I have a feeling it's going to suck as much as this guy's other two movies. I don't think this guy's a good director. He's not. So, and then I read, I think it was The Verge and Entertainment Weekly both had behind the scenes what went wrong articles about New Mutants. And from it seems like the director had a specific way he wanted to do things, and the studio is like, hold up, maybe we have some better ideas, and they'd bring in script doctors to tweak some stuff, and Josh Boone would be like, fuck it, I'm not doing that. And he did his own thing. So I have a feeling that, unlike most times where the director is probably right and the studio just wants to fuck it up to make things more mainstream and they end up shitting on it, this seems to be a case where maybe the studio was right. And not necessarily that they actually would have made it better. I mean, the people in charge of the X-Men franchise at Fox were people like Scott Kinberg, who made the shitty Dark Phoenix movie. So, any X-Men movie that's not X-Men, X-Men 2, Deadpool 2, or First Class or Days of Future Past, or Logan, because most of the X-Men movies have not been good. But it still probably would have been better than the movie we got. Maybe, they should have punched up the horror a bit. I don't know, but... So, New Mutants. Of these three bigger movies that have been pushed out into theaters, Tenet's the best. Unhinged is fun. And New Mutants, you can skip because it sucks. But all three experiences at these theaters have been roughly the same, where they've been weekend days, they've been weirdly empty, the theaters have been unusually clean, and even in the shitty auditorium with the people talking in New Mutants, I still felt safer in that room than at most other public places I've been to during COVID. And, now that these movies have been out, and Unhinged is doing alright, I guess. Unhinged will turn a profit. New Mutants is bombed, and it probably deserves to bomb. But Disney can probably afford that bomb. And Tenet it's doing the long walk. It wants to push this out slowly. and I don't know how it's going to turn out. It's doing all right internationally, I guess, but yeah. But the problem is, I mean, without going to a movie theater that's in a major city, and again, right now I think only 70% of theaters in the US are open. 30% are still closed, and the places they're closed are places like Los Angeles and New York City, as well as all of my state of North Carolina. I still cannot see a movie in my own state, which is why, I've gone on these trips and seen them there. But it seems like people are generally either A, they're not interested in these movies, which includes Tenet, and maybe it'd be a little bit different if Black Widow were out, or the Bond movie, or Fast and Furious 8 or 9, or whatever fucking number they're on. Maybe those would be a little bit different, but maybe it's the product, or maybe people are literally just more scared to go to a movie theater than they are to a sit-down restaurant, or to shop in a store. Don't know. I can only guess. But movie theaters aren't doing well right now. And, because Tenet has not done numbers that people have hoped, everything from October, except for the Murder on the Orient Express sequel, has pushed back. Wonder Woman is now a December movie, along with Dune, both from the same studio. I think it's a little short-sighted for Warner's to release them both so close together, but okay. I mean, I've heard that either they think Wonder Woman will skew to the women and Dune will skew to the men, they won't have a lot of overlap, or they think Wonder Woman will skew domestic and Dune will skew international, and so they won't overlap. I still think that's kind of short-sighted, but whatever. But that's moved to December. Candyman was supposed to open October. That's to be determined right now. Greenland, that movie that just looks like Deep Impact from 1998, comet hitting the Earth movie, looks like the exact same fucking thing for the most part. That's pushed back indefinitely, I think. So now, theaters were closed, and if they're closed, they maybe have a bit more room to negotiate for either a government bailout or with their landlords or whatever, but they reopened for Tenet. And now, all they have is Tenet, for the entire month of September and the entire month of October. The only product they really have, aside from catalog titles, is Tenet. So they reopened for this one movie, and if people don't want to come out to see Tenet, then they're in a world of hurt, because they're open, they've lost any negotiating power they kind of have for that. It's like, hey, your business is open now. So, all they have is Tenet. Now, I've heard that some theaters, that maybe they will close Monday through Thursday, so they won't be open those weekdays, and they'll only open on the weekends for Tenet and nothing else. So I've heard that plan, but otherwise, they took a bullet here. The theaters were like, we're gonna wait for a big movie, and then Warner Brothers is like, okay, we'll push out Tenet. And the theaters are like, okay, we'll open for Tenet and we'll open for Mulan. And then Disney's like, we're going to make Mulan $30 on our streaming service. So theaters don't have a 1-2 punch of big movies. They have a 1 punch of Tenet, and they also kind of have Unhinged and New Mutants. Which, And then they were like, all right, well, we'll do that. So maybe Tenet only gets September, but we have some October movies. And then Tenet makes, $20 million, and then the studios are frightened, and they're like, hey, people don't want to go back to the movies yet. And so they push things back, and they hope something will get better. And then the theaters are screwed, because basically the only product they have to offer is Tenet. Now, okay, let's say movie theaters open in New York and LA, and the people who want to see Tenet in those states have not already gone to Connecticut or New Jersey or Vegas, or some of the counties in California that have theaters open right now. Let's say they haven't traveled for Tenet, or any other movie for that matter. Maybe there'll be another rush. Maybe those big cities, when they open up and they represent an inordinately large number of the movie-going public in the United States, maybe they'll help. Or maybe they won't. I don't know. When North Carolina opens, which may or may not be October 2nd, Are people in this state gonna want to go see the movies? I don't know. I mean, um, I already have Alamo Season Pass, which is paused while the theater is closed. But maybe I'll reactivate it for October and, go see Tenet another time. And Alamo always plays a lot of catalog titles, and they'll probably have other stuff I want to see anyway. But I'll see at that point, because normally the audience that goes to my Alamo Draft House, I mean, independent movies that nobody wants to see sell out all the time. I mean, the last movie I saw at Alamo was this Irish supernatural comedy with Will Forte called Extraordinary, and that was pretty much a sold-out theater, and that was 2 days before movie shut down. Or even movies like, High Life, the space movie with Robert Pattinson that nobody wanted to see. That was a sold-out screening. All these weird movies that don't sell out in any other theater usually sell out at my Alamo, so maybe that audience will rush back, but I don't know. Because otherwise, if the studios aren't going to put out more product to try to entice people back, then these theaters are in for a world of hurt. And, I mean, it remains to see that maybe Tenet wasn't the right movie. I mean, Christopher Nolan, the Tenet is not Marvel. It's a James Bond movie with time travel. It's a bit more pretentious. It's a bit more hoity-toity than some of those movies. So whether, Joe Bob public in the Midwest is going to rush out to see Tenet, probably not. As opposed to something like Black Widow or the actual James Bond or one of these horror movies. I don't know. It remains to be seen how what Freaky, that Freaky Friday horror slasher movie in November might do. I don't know. But movie theaters are hurting right now, and it remains to be seen what would entice people back to the theater. Is it fear of COVID, or is it in that theaters are less safe than other locations that people are okay going to, despite the fact that they probably shouldn't be as okay sitting at restaurants and going to stores? Or is it the slate? The fact that we had these 3 bigger movies and a couple other indie stuff, but these 3 bigger movies released in theaters, and these are not the movies that are drawing people in. I don't know the answer to that. But if you have a theory, leave it in the comments below. If you are comfortable going to the movie theaters and have gone, leave a comment explaining why. Or if you're not comfortable, leave a comment explaining why. I'm kind of interested in crowdsourcing opinions here, because I'm kind of curious as to why this is segregated, as opposed to some other activities. Because from my experience seeing these 3 movies at 3 different theaters in 2 different states, I have personally, just my own opinion, I have felt safer going to these movie theaters than I have felt going to Target or going to a restaurant or anywhere else I've gone that is not my own apartment since COVID. And I don't know if other people feel differently. I mean, casinos are open in Vegas and people are going to that. So I don't understand why people are still so iffy about the movie theater specifically. And it might just be the slate, or it might be that they feel somewhat different about this. I don't know.